1,000 miles from the nearest coastline. No sun for 3 days straight. The air is so cold it burns your lungs on the way in, and the spray coming off the waves is freezing mid-air, turning into needles of ice before it even hits the deck. You are standing on a wooden ship, built from dry timber, sealed with tar, and sitting on top of barrels of gunpowder, which means the one thing that could actually save you, fire, is the one thing you are never, ever allowed to light. No heater, no insulation, no dry clothes. Just wet wool, salt pork, and 40 other desperate men packed into a space smaller than a college dorm room. For a Golden Age pirate, winter wasn't a season. It was a second enemy, one that never boarded the ship and never had to, because it was already inside every plank. Most people think piracy happened under a permanent tropical sun. Rum, palm trees, warm water. But some of history's most feared crews spent months at a time in conditions that would put a modern human in a hospital within hours. Today, we're breaking down exactly how they stayed alive without ever striking a match. And some of the answers are more disturbing than you'd expect. To understand why pirates froze in the dark, instead of just lighting a fire, you have to understand what a pirate ship actually was. Forget the movie version, the towering galleon, with a roaring hearth in the captain's cabin. Most pirate vessels were repurposed merchant sloops and brigantines, built to haul cargo as cheaply as possible, not to keep a crew warm. The hull was only a few inches of oak between the crew and the Atlantic Ocean. The seams were packed with oakum, a tar-soaked fiber that was, essentially, kindling. Below that sat the hold, stacked with barrels of black powder for the cannons. One stray spark in the wrong place didn't mean a bad night. It meant the ship ceased to everyone in an instant. So captains enforced brutally simple fire discipline. A single galley stove, usually a shallow iron or brick firebox, was the only permitted flame on board, and even that was watched constantly and doused the second weather turned rough. Everywhere else, the crew's quarters, the gun deck, the hold, was a hard no-flame zone, all day, every day, all winter. That single rule is the reason everything else on this list had to exist. No fire meant no easy way to dry clothing, no easy way to warm a freezing man, and no room for error. With fire off the table, clothing became a life-or-death engineering problem, and pirates solved it with whatever they could steal, buy, or scavenge. There were no uniforms. The base layer was almost always wool, because wool has one property nothing else on a ship could match. It still insulates even when soaked, and on a leaking wooden hull, everything was soaked. Crews layered wool shirts, trousers, and stockings, sometimes 3 or 4 shirts deep. Over that came whatever blocked the wind. A leather jerkin, or the infamous tarpaulin jacket, a canvas coat, soaked in tar or linseed oil until it turned stiff, waterproof, and reportedly foul-smelling enough to clear a room. It didn't matter. It kept the wind off your chest. Then came the grease. Rendered animal fat, seal blubber, whale oil, whatever a crew could hunt was rubbed straight onto exposed skin as a wind barrier, worked into boots and jackets to waterproof them, burned in small lamps for a bit of light and heat below deck, and eaten raw for its raw calorie density when the body needed fuel fast. And here's the detail most people never hear. Pirates rarely washed their inner layers. The buildup of sweat, salt, and natural body oil actually thickened into a second skin of insulation. It was disgusting. It also worked. Frostbite was the alternative. Hands and feet were the real problem. Mittens were preferred over gloves because fingers could share warmth, but mittens made handling, rigging nearly impossible, so sailors constantly swapped bare hands for mitts and back again. Most men went barefoot on deck even in the cold, because wet leather boots on a pitching deck meant you'd slip straight over the side. Instead, boots were stuffed with straw, dried grass, or shredded cloth, anything that trapped a pocket of air between the skin and the freezing outside world. Surviving the open ocean in the dead of winter took a very specific kind of stubbornness. And honestly, building a channel around stories like this one takes a bit of the same. If you're into the darker, weirder corners of maritime history that most creators skip over, hit subscribe and stick around. We're about to get to the part of this story that's genuinely unsettling. The place where pirates actually got their heat from. Here's the twist nobody expects. The single most effective heat source on a fireless pirate ship wasn't a blanket, a coat, or even the grease. It was other people. Below deck, 20 to 40 men were crammed into a space with a ceiling so low most couldn't stand up straight, packed together in hammocks. Slung close enough to touch, their combined body heat could push the temperature in that hold noticeably higher than the deck above, sometimes by a significant margin. It wasn't comfortable. It was, by every surviving account, miserable. Thick, damp air, condensation, dripping off the beams from dozens of men, breathing in an unventilated box, and a smell strong enough that new crew members reportedly gagged on their first night below. It kept men alive. But it kept men alive. Hammocks themselves were quietly brilliant cold weather gear. They lifted a sleeping man off the freezing deck planks, wrapped around him on both sides to cut heat loss, and could be hung in tight clusters so neighbors radiated warmth into each other. Some crews even rotated sleeping positions, giving the warmest spot near the ceiling, where rising heat collected. To whoever had just come off a freezing watch and needed to recover fastest. Captains also shortened winter watches. A normal 4 hours on, 4 hours off rotation could drop to 2 hours, sometimes even 1 in the worst storms, just to limit how long any single man was exposed to open deck cold before he could get back into the human furnace below. Every pirate movie has the scene. A man, half frozen, handed a mug of rum, warming his bones by the fire. Real pirates absolutely drank to cope with the cold. But the science of what alcohol actually does to a freezing body is almost the exact opposite of the myth. Alcohol is a vasodilator. It widens the blood vessels near your skin, which floods your extremities with warm blood and creates a genuine, immediate sensation of heat. The problem is that this rushes your body's core warmth straight out to the surface, where it radiates away into the freezing air around you. You feel warmer, while your actual internal temperature drops faster. It's one of the most dangerous illusions in cold weather survival, and pirate crews had no idea they were doing it to themselves. So why did they drink so much of it anyway? Because grog, a rough mix of rum, hot water, and sometimes a squeeze of lime, numbed the pain, the exhaustion, and the bone-deep misery enough that men could keep working. It wasn't recreation. It was self-medication for a problem. Alcohol was quietly making worse. The pirates who actually survived long winters weren't the ones drinking the most grog. They were the ones who kept moving, hauling lines, climbing rigging, doing anything that kept the heart pumping, and the body generating its own heat, and the body generating instead of borrowing a false warmth from a bottle. Hot food mattered far more than hot drink. A bowl of porridge or salted stew, even lukewarm, could push a man's core temperature up just enough to survive the next watch on deck. That made the ship's cook, usually one of the lowest-ranked men aboard, one of the most quietly important people on the entire crew during winter. Sometimes staying at sea simply wasn't survivable, and crews beached their ships along the remote coastlines of Scotland, Ireland, Scandinavia, or the Canadian Maritimes, places so isolated that even naval patrols avoided them in winter. There, with no fire ban to worry about on solid ground, pirates built rough camps from driftwood and spare sailcloth, hunted and ice-fished for food, melted snow for water, and waited out the worst months while repairing storm-battered ships. These camps were grim in their own right. Disease spread fast through unwashed, undernourished men living in close quarters, and a crew that entered camp 50 strong might leave with a third of that number gone. The frozen ground was often too hard to dig graves at all, so the dead were sometimes simply stacked aside until the spring thaw made burial possible. It's one of the least romantic images in the entire history of piracy. And it's exactly the reality that got buried under centuries of adventure stories. Surviving a pirate winter was never about comfort. It was about grinding endurance, wearing clothes that hadn't been dry in weeks, hacking into a stinking hold just to borrow warmth from strangers, and knowing the drink in your hand was quietly working against you, even as it numbed the pain. No fire, no heating, no modern gear, just wool, grease, body heat, and a stubborn refusal to die that most of us alive today have honestly never had to test. The pirates who made it through were tougher, not because they wanted glory, but because the alternative was freezing to death 1,000 miles from anyone who would ever know. So, the next time you complain about a cold house, remember, you're one thermostat click away from a comfort that the fiercest crews in pirate history couldn't even imagine. If this kind of deep dive into the brutal, unglamorous side of history is your thing, subscribe for more and let us know in the comments. What's the one survival detail from this video you didn't expect? Stay warm, and we'll see you in the next one.